Hi, everyone. I'm Charlie Kawasaki, CTO for Packstar Curtiss-Wright. I'm also a Technology Association of Oregon board member. I'm moderating this session today and pleased to introduce our speaker, Peter Romnes. Peter is the cybersecurity principal in the US Public Sector CTO office at Cisco Systems. He brings Cisco's advanced cybersecurity solutions to departments and agencies at federal, state, and local governments and educational institutions. He works with NIST and the National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence and has contributed to their 1800 series special publications. Peter helps the broader IT community understand the very latest cyber capabilities and risk mitigation methods to effectively address cyber threats. His technical background and passion for clearly conveying high-tech topics allows him to explain advanced concepts to all audiences from engineer to business leaders. Prior to Cisco Systems, Peter held leadership positions at Hewlett-Packard, AT&T, and Panasonic. He holds a degree in mechanical engineering from Duke University. I'm excited to learn more about what Peter is covering today on Zero Trust, the next generation cybersecurity architecture. Peter, take it away.
Yeah, well, thank you very much. Zero trust has become this huge buzzword in the industry. And that's why I titled this talk, There I Said It, Now What? Because every single person in the industry is talking about zero trust right now. And everybody has a different idea about what it is and what it means. And, what do I buy to be zero trust? And so I wanted to, one, dispel some of the rumors and give you an easy to understand definition of zero trust, as well as show you what NIST is thinking in their publication on zero trust. It's special publication 800-207, and use that to help explain zero trust. Then show you some things that you should make sure to take into account. And then I'm going to apply it to a couple other things that are hot topics in cybersecurity. One of them being something called SASE, Secure Access Service Edge, and another CMMC, Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification, and kind of show you that you can apply zero trust to all of these things. So it's not, zero trust is not something that you buy. So to start out, I like starting kind of simple, and I'm sure you all are probably wondering, okay? And the whole industry has been wondering this for a long time, and that's, how do I protect all of the users that could be on campus? They could be working from a coffee shop. They could be halfway around the world. All the different types of devices, and not just user devices, but IoT devices, and all the devices in my environment, things like network switches and routers, and all of my data and applications that are no longer in one data center. They're spread amongst clouds all over the world. And so that becomes a really hard thing to think about. So how do I protect all of those when they're everywhere? And the industry has been thinking about this for a long time. In 2004, a group got together and said, we're going to solve this deperimeterization problem. But deperimeterization, never took off. It was, and one of my peers at Cisco says it's just because the word was too hard to say. And then early on in my career at Cisco, we were talking about something called the borderless network. Well, people hated the sound of borderless network. And I at the time, I was working with the Department of Defense an awful lot, and they absolutely hated borderless anything. And so this guy from Forrester named John Kinderberg came up with this term zero trust. And you know what? That was kind of a cool sounding name. It was easy to say, and it has kind of taken off. So what he said was that with zero trust, you no longer assume everything is good just because it's in your environment. So the username and password gets you into my enclave, and all of a sudden you have access to everything. And he turned that around and said, no, no, no. You assume that everything that you have control over is connected directly to the big bad internet, which we know is riddled with threats and is horrible. And so you assume everything is bad until it's proven otherwise. So you start with zero trust, and then you earn trust, you or whatever wants connection. So just, kind of in a nutshell, and here's my very first thing about zero trust. It is not something you buy. It is an architecture. It's a way of looking at things. Another friend of mine calls it a lifestyle choice. It's kind of a journey, and it assumes that there is no perimeter. And so there is no inside. And so for every connection that happens to the data and resources that you are able to control, you want the requester to earn trust before they are connected. And you want to continuously check trust. So, I would like the term earn trust, but it's just not as cool as the sound of zero trust. So, that's where we are. Zero trust has all of this hype, but and a lot of the people I talk to are sick of hearing about zero trust, but I think it's a really good thing because it's taking off. It's making people look at the right things. This is a very good way to look at securing our data, which of course is what we're trying to do. Everybody wants to make sure that what I'm responsible for is secure. Okay, so a little bit of history on zero trust. The group that got together in 2004 was named as the Jericho Forum. It was mainly European CISOs, but there were people from around the world to talk about this deperimeterization problem. And then, it spit around for a while, and Forrester coined this term zero trust. John Kindervag did in 2010 or 2004, 2010. And then Google took the work of the Jericho Forum and many other people talking about deperimeterization and created a web-based security for their organization, and they called it BeyondCorp. So BeyondCorp became kind of an example of how zero trust can work. And then in 2017, a guy named Chase Cunningham took over at Forrester, and he expanded zero trust into what he called zero trust extended. At that point, Gartner didn't want to be left out, and so they called their model Continuous Adaptive Risk and Trust Assessment, or CARTA. And then, that takes us to where we are today, where everybody's talking about zero trust architecture. And thank goodness, NIST is part of the Department of Commerce. They set standards, and they're considered a very trusted source. And so, that's kind of what happened with zero trust, and it's become an accepted term. Okay, so Charlie, does that make sense so far?
Sure does.
Oh, I caught you on mute. Sorry about that. So let's take a look at what NIST has said in their special publication 800-207. And they really narrow down to the core of when you set up a zero trust architecture is about access control. It's having your policies that when a subject, and this drawing is a little bit, I think it's a little bit misleading because the subject isn't always a laptop. And a subject is a person with a laptop. It may be another device. So it could be all kinds of things. It may be one app talking to another app. But the whole idea is to be able to control those. And so in order to do that, you have inputs. And they call these policy input points, or PIPs. And so all of these things go into creating your policy and managing your policy. So, your data access policy, you put that into your policy engine about, you're making risk-based decisions on if I have students, they can go to this website and to this data set and to this, say, building. device that opens a door. And then you have things like your PKI, your public key infrastructure, which allows you to share, to encrypt files and decrypt them. And your ID management is, so this person is a student. So all that goes into making your policy engine and policy administrator work. On the other side are things like a CDM system, and CDM is a federal government program, but it is also a general term that means continuous diagnostic and mitigation. So these are all of the tools that you use to see what's going on in your environment electronically, where the different flows in your environment are going, and also what threats. So all of your threat identification systems and threat mitigation systems are in CDM. NIST was very deliberate at pointing out that threat intelligence is important, because if there's a new threat in an organization, all of a sudden your policy will have to change to take into account that threat. And then the ability to log and things like that. So all of that goes in, are all inputs into this policy decision. And then the policy decision goes to policy enforcement points. And this is what makes those things happen inside your environment. So if a subject is calling to go to a database, which is the enterprise resource on the right side, it has to go through this policy point that says, wait a minute, you're not going there. Show me that you're a trusted person. And so you may have to put in a username and password. You may have to use a second factor like a fingerprint. It may check your device. It could check all of those other things. And then it says, okay, you can go, and you go to you're allowed to go to that resource. But then if something changes on your access request, say that all of a sudden there's a new threat found and it's determined to be on your system, well, that policy point would have to reject your access. So that's kind of the whole idea behind Zero Trust. Now, at Cisco, we took it one step farther. And we said, well, wait a minute, let's get back to this original question. How do I protect users, devices, and data and applications, right? It's not just a person on the laptop. It's not just a person. So, the users are that person. And we developed this term that we call trusted workforce. And then all of the different devices we say are the trusted workplace. And then the applications are a trusted workload. So workforce, workplace, and workload are 3 Ws. And we did this pretty much to remind people that it's not just the user, okay? And just to reinforce that a little bit more, the user would be defined by multiple different types of categories. It could be employees or students, it could be teachers, and just you can see the list. And the workplace includes all kinds of different devices, and the workload includes all of your data and the different apps that all, if you think about it, one app often needs to go to different data sources, and it may even need to go to different apps, okay? And we decided that at Cisco, we were going to try and make it easy for people to understand these 3 Ws and easy to, kind of identify some things. So, I'm at risk of doing an advertisement for Cisco here, but I really want to use this as an example. So for the workforce, what's the most important thing is to make sure that the person and the device they are on are secure. And so that I can make a trust-based decision for any one of their requests. So Cisco has this product called Duo. You probably have seen or heard of it before. It's primarily started as a multi-function, multi-factor authentication. And what it does is it checks the device posture. So does this device have the right version of software on it? Does it have the required security on it that we want? So maybe a six character password on it, things like that. That checks the device, it checks the person. And then it can apply this this access decision to either on-prem or in cloud-based applications. And it's, it does all kinds of things that really make it easy to make sure who that person is. So, I talked about multi-factor, I talked about device health and posture, but it also can apply some behavioral analytics. So if the same person is trying to log in from two impossible places, or what's called impossible travel. So at one point they're logging in from, say, University of Oregon, and then in 5 minutes they're logging in from Washington, D.C. That's called impossible travel. That can help happen, and this takes care of that. But I think that the biggest thing about applying multi-factor authentication is making it easier. And every customer that I've seen that does multi-factor authentication runs into a lot of resistance from their users. Users hate it. They hate having to type in, numbers that are text to them or off of a dongle. They hate having to make that one step. And the thing about this is it makes it real easy. When you go to log in, it sends you a push to your device. So all of a sudden, you have multi-factor there, and then you've done your fingerprint on your device, you've logged into your device, so that's another factor. And then you just hit the approve button. So it makes it really easy, and it gets rid of that barrier to multi-factor. And if you talk to almost anyone, multi-factor is a huge help that very quickly makes a difference in your security posture. If you're not doing multi-factor, this is one of the fastest and easiest ways to get started on zero trust. Okay, now just to enforce the workplace, it's the whole idea of allowing the appropriate users to get to the appropriate resources in your organization. So you want to make sure that the devices, not just the user and the person, but all the devices are authenticated and authorized. And you want to make it as granular as possible. If you have a VLAN with all of your infusion pumps on it, and one of them has a problem, you don't want to shut down all of your infusion pumps. You want to just shut down the one that has a problem. And so, being granular is important. And you also want to be able to monitor it. So, Cisco has this capability where we discover the devices, so we know what they are and we can classify them. And then you do this micro segmentation of access policy. And then, of course, the important thing is monitoring it and removing access if needed. And kind of going back to the core identity part of the zero trust architecture, I kind of want to just arrange this a little differently and show you that, when we start talking about this trusted workplace, that there's a lot of things that go into making a risk-based decision of who can have access to what, and then enforcing it. And so, it's not just the username and password, it's the who is connecting, which is, of course, the username and password. What type of device are they connecting from? What time of day is it? Where are they connecting? What are the characteristics of that network they're connecting from? Is it Bluetooth? Is it wireless? Is it, at say a coffee shop where a lot of people could overlook their screen? And then, taking into account threat and vulnerability and assigning them into a group. And at Cisco, we call that a scalable group tag, but it can be done in other ways. But then so that is your policy decision point. And then the policy enforcement point has always been thought of as being a firewall. And I just want to point out that in the NIST 207, they point out that it's not only firewalls that can make these policy decisions. In fact, the new generation of switches and routers, which are probably already in your environment and have been for years, are a great security device. They can all enforce these decisions using the secure group tag. So, Again, zero trust is not something that you buy. It's a way of thinking. And oftentimes what you have in your environment is already capable of doing much of what's needed for zero trust. And then the final W is workload. And we like to remind people that you have to monitor traffic amongst your workloads. We sell a product called Tetration that does that. It's now called Secure Workload, where it's a new name for it. But it looks at all the contingencies amongst your apps and data in both your on-prem and cloud applications and data, and it maps them. And it allows you to control movement of what's going on with them. So it allows you, one, to see what's going on. It allows you to create unique policies for every application and workload, and then to enforce them. Okay, so that's the whole idea of workload. And just kind of tying up the story, it's workforce, workload, and workplace. And we also take and map that against the NIST Corp architecture. So, your workforce is your people, your workplace is your environment, your workload is your data and apps. Okay. Now, that's kind of a description of zero trust. But what I'd like to do is also show you that applying zero trust principles can help you solve and meet other goals in your organization. And it kind of goes to something that we're seeing in the environment of most of our customers right now, is that a while, 5-10 years ago, this is what the data flow looked like. If you had roaming people, they usually VPN'd into headquarters, and if you had branches, they used an MPLS circuit that would go to headquarters. And then if they wanted to go out to the internet, they would go from the headquarters or from your data center. And that worked great because most of the data they wanted was already in your data center. It was your proprietary apps and your on-premise apps. And only about 20% of traffic was going out to the internet. And what has changed is that most of our apps now and most of our traffic needs to go directly to the internet. And so going in by VPN and then out to the internet or by MPLS, it's causing a bottleneck that provides a bad experience for users. Now, when Charlie introduced me, he said that I work with all types of customers in public sector. And one of those is the federal government. And they have a program that says that all connections to, or they had a program that said that all connections to the internet had to go through a security stack in Washington, D.C. area called Einstein. And so the TIC standard for Trusted Internet Connection. So instead of the branch offices and single users going directly to the internet, that was considered unsafe because they didn't have enough security there. And so they had to come back to Washington, D.C., go through this stack of security products that allowed the government to protect that traffic. And this resulted in something called the TIC tax. And it's very similar to what users outside of federal government have, is that if you have a branch office that's located, say, in Oregon somewhere, and you want to go to the Office 365 cloud, they have to go back to headquarters and then go back across the country again to the Office 365 cloud, which may be a couple miles from their location. And so they've incurred latency in their application, which is just slow response time. They've incurred the cost of traveling across their data traveling across the country, and it's just a bad user experience. Okay, so that was called the TIC tax in federal government. And so to solve this in federal government, they've gone to TIC 3.0, which allows you to create trust zones, smaller trust zones around either a branch or a particular organization. And think about what that applies, how that applies to zero trust is that you're shrinking the zone. So you're making this policy decision, you're putting the security around that user, and we're making a decision that because they have the appropriate security, they can go directly to the cloud. And so, this whole TIC 3.0 is an implementation of zero trust. And what has happened is that we've gone from this TIC tax to the TIC 3.0, where we say, okay, we're going to put these trust zones around each of these branch offices and around the headquarters. And we're even going to allow individual users to have a trust zone around them. And so we're shrinking that down. And we're saying that, from that trust zone, they can only go to the specific places that we tell them. And so all of a sudden you can go directly to the cloud, and get rid of those connections that are costing you money and causing you user satisfaction. So in federal government, that is called TIC 3.0, that solution. Outside of federal government, it's called SASE, Secure Access Service Edge. And the different organizations that do consulting have different names for them. Forrester calls it Zero Trust Edge. ESG calls it Elastic Cloud Gateway, but really all of them talk about how in a cloud architecture, if you can move some of these functions out to the user and apply zero trust principles, then you can have a much better way of your people working. Okay. Now, SASE is about identity and security, which are both zero trust, but it's also about connectivity. And so you have to have an ability to make sure that you are controlling the connectivity of your users. And when we start looking at how does it apply to zero trust, well, it's assuring that only the right users have access to your, on their secure devices, have access to your applications. We're making sure that all the connections between apps and across multi-cloud are protected. And we're making sure that all the users and their devices connect to the network in the way that we say. Okay, so we're trying to maintain control. And I'm going to show you a slide now that's going to be a little bit of an architecture slide, and I don't want to bore you. But the whole idea here is that you want to provide your users with flexibility, and you want to provide your organization with flexibility. So by using a software-defined WAN, wide area network fabric, you can control all of that. So in this case, we have a direct internet access branch at the top left that is using mainly a secure internet gateway, or SIG. And this is the idea, is that branch, most of their traffic goes through security and then goes directly to the internet. Whereas if I'm at a branch with that has some of their data coming back to headquarters and some is going to the internet, then I want to allow that flexibility. And even for the end user, I want to make sure that they have the flexibility also. And so you use a combination of technologies in order to do this. And one thing that I want to point out is that as part of cloud architecture and a part of zero trust, oftentimes people talk about the VPN is dead and they want to get away from VPN. Well, that is great if all you're doing is sending all your traffic through one of these secure internet gateways. But if you have data in your data center that you want users to be able to get access to, and you have security devices on those users' endpoints, you want to be able to control them. So the VPN is no longer what it used to be. Kind of like a firewall is no longer the same, because now it's a next generation firewall. The modern VPN has become almost a security connector. Now at Cisco, ours is called AnyConnect. It provides the basic VPN capabilities, but it also allows the people that manage your organization's enterprise or your networks and environment in order to have a secure communication channel to the end user devices, so that you can put your mobile device management capabilities into this VPN container. You can put your security capabilities, the ability to check the files that are there and do threat detection and response. So there's an awful lot that can be done with a VPN. And also you can direct traffic and say, okay, for this endpoint, traffic that needs to go to the Microsoft Cloud for O365 can go straight there, as long as it goes through this security that I have. Whereas traffic that needs to go to another cloud might have to come to headquarters first, all based upon your policy engine and policy decisions. Okay. And then the other thing that is that was shown up in that SASE was this idea of a secure internet gateway. And that's the idea of moving this whole stack of security into the cloud, so that if a user wants to go directly to an application that is in a cloud, then it would be inspected by these devices. Okay, so that's kind of how this whole idea of SASE works and how it works with Zero Trust. The goal here is just to make sure that users can connect from anywhere to anything with the best experience. So, how is it the fastest way to get there, and to do it securely? Okay, so that's the whole idea there. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is CMMC. And many of you may or may not heard of CMMC. It stands for Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. Okay, and it applies to basically anybody who is getting a grant or a contract or any kind of funding from the Department of Defense. And we're already seeing other federal agencies say, okay, if you're getting funding from us, we like this idea of CMMC, and we're looking at applying it also. The ones that have said this so far are the Department of Homeland Security and Department of Energy, but we're seeing quite a few of the federal agencies say that they're going to do it. Okay, now where did it come from, and what is it? CMMC is going to be a future requirement. They're already starting to apply it to the very largest contracts. And it's in a self-reporting form right now. But what it does is it takes all of the government requirements that people have always signed off on and self-certified that they were going to do when they're applying for a contract or a grant. So for a long time, folks have had to say that they meet these particular requirements and sign that when they apply. Well, what happened is that people were just signing it and they weren't really paying attention to it. And a lot of intellectual property from the government was getting stolen. So the government has said, we're going to make, it will no longer be a voluntary self-certifying thing. We're going to say on future contracts that you have to be audited by a third-party organization, and they have to certify you at one of 5 levels, and you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 levels that tell where you are in your cyber maturity process. Now, just basic safeguarding of contract information is level 1, so that's a fairly simple, and that will be used on many of the non-secret contracts and things like that. A lot of other contracts are going to be at level 3, and that's considered good hygiene. And then the largest contracts with DoD and with top secret organizations will be at level 5. And it's gonna, depending on the contract and how critical it is, in the solicitation, it will say this must meet level 1, level 3, level 5. And they do think that level 2 and level 4 will be mainly stepping stones to the next. So they don't expect many contracts to be there, but 1, 3, and 5 will be the main ones. And in order to apply for that grant or for that contract, you will have to meet that and have been audited. Okay. Now, there are 17 different domains in CMMC, and I've listed them here. And you'll notice that many of them are things like access control, which is a technological capability. But then there's a lot of things that are people, process, and policy. Awareness training is not necessarily a technical capability. Personnel security is not something you'd think of for IT. But if you look at it and you start looking at where these overlap with zero trust, and I just did a quick, off the top of my head mapping of it, but the access control and media protection are all parts of the zero trust core according to NIST. And then all the PIPs, the policy input points, I have in this orange color. So configuration management is part of that. Identity and authentication may be part of it. And then parts of it include both. So, applying zero trust can be a great basis for CMMC. And if you have a zero trust environment, it makes it a lot easier to make CMMC happen. Okay. Now, moving on, I want to jump back to zero trust and talk about what I see as the most critical capabilities for zero trust. First off is the core of the NIST document, which is trusted access. You need to control access. You need to control it in as a segmented way as you can. For the best is that for every request to every asset should have a trust decision put in front of it. An interim step may be a request from a group to a group of capabilities may be a good interim step, but the closer you can micro-segment it, the better. The ability to automate all of this is critical. Think about it, with all these trust-based decisions being made and having to be continuously monitored, you're not going to be able to control access, writing access control commands in your ACLs, access control lists. And so it's critical that they be automated and that these things happen and that users can self-enroll and then be able to get to the device, to the assets they want. The whole idea of continuous monitoring, looking for threats in your organization, and continuously being able to take action is critical. Okay. Now, just kind of tying up, here's a little ad for Cisco. We have a product that monitors behavior on the network. It's called Network Analytics, used to be called Stealth Watch. We also have a product called Advanced Malware Protection, which goes on endpoints and it allows you to detect threats. So those are two of the things that I always like to highlight as being important for zero trust, is knowing the threats in your environment and knowing the activity in your environment. Okay. And then the third one that I talked about was automation. There are lots of ways to automate. Usually it's called a SIM or a SOAR. And Cisco has a product that we call SecureX. If you have our security, any of our security solutions, we provide SecureX to you at no additional cost. And it allows you to aggregate all of your security devices into one application. So you can see on the screen here on the left is all of this different security applications right here. And that could be Cisco applications and a whole list of applications from our partners and competitors that can be integrated here. On the right side is all of my threat feeds. And in the center is my custom dashboard that I've made with all my different capabilities. So, you know, on this particular one, I'm tracking my MITRE attack capabilities, and I'm tracking other feeds from other devices. So, you know, the normal thing that would happen is, say, a new threat is reported by one of my threat feeds. I can just click on that threat and it will automatically copy all of the indicators into my system. It will go look on every one of my devices and see where that one of those indicators might be. And then it will give me the option to with a few clicks, to take care of that, that threat. So it's this whole, you probably heard the term XDR. And this is the whole idea of this automation and integration that makes the job of a network defender a much better job. I like to say it makes it less sucky. And so, you know, all of these things combine into Zero Trust. And, you know, in my bio, it talked about how I work with NIST. Currently, there's a lab being created at National Institutes of Standards and Technology in their National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence on Zero Trust. And I've listed the different Cisco products that are going to be included and that I gave you a little bit of a highlight on today. So the next thing that people normally ask is, how do I get started? And you know, it's a whole idea of becoming a more mature cyber organization. And this slide follows guidance for almost any type of project that you want to go to. But the first thing is, you know, knowing who and what is in my environment. And so you're creating this user trust, right? You're applying your multi-factor and you're figuring out who all the users are. You're scanning your network to see what data and what data and applications are out there. And then you're starting to create this access control, this micro-segmented access as you are building in. And then you start putting policy around it and creating these policies. And then you start enforcing the policies. So first you create policies, you see how they're going to affect your users without affecting them, and then you start enforcing them. And then you start adding in things like the ability to respond to threats quickly. Now, you don't have to do it in this order, but that's a nice way of doing it. And then additional thoughts that I always have is, you know, you always want to start with a plan. You want to look at where you are, so assess where you are, and you can do that on your own using different best practices, or you can call in a vendor or an organization like CISA that can help you assess where you are, and then know where you want to be, and then develop a plan to get from where you are to your future preferred state. I always talk about using best practices. I love NIST, as you can tell. NIST has a cybersecurity framework that is great for all levels of maturity. And then one thing I talk about is getting a quick win. So things like DNS security, you know, making sure people are safe when they're surfing the web, and things like multi-factor can be implemented very quickly and give great value. Think cloud smart. In most cases, a cloud-based solution will be cheaper and easier for you, but if it's a huge application and it's mature, it may cost you more to go to a cloud. And then from your vendors, always demand that they listen to what you have to say and what you want for your organization, and demand that whatever they offer integrates with others and can be automated. So, you know, that's my advice to you, and I believe we have about 13 minutes for questions, and I thank you for your time.
Thanks, Peter. Charlie here. I don't see any questions in chat or in the Q&A box right now. So if people have questions, please submit them. I could go on all day with you asking all kinds of questions, but let me try to focus on some things that I think people might be thinking, or might questions that might apply to the most number of people on the seminar today. So the first thing is, I get an email from a security vendor probably every 15 minutes saying they have a zero trust solution, or they're putting on a zero trust webinar because they have the solution for me. So it's really hard to figure out what the right path is. What questions do you think organizations should ask of vendors to help them sort out all this noise and figure out what they should be doing?
So the first thing is, any vendor that comes to you and says they can solve your zero trust problem, I'd be very cautious. No single vendor can do everything. Cisco is the largest security vendor out there, and we can't do everything. We can help you decide, what you want to do, and we can provide many parts of it. But first off, don't trust anybody that comes to you. The next thing to do is,
You mean apply zero trust to my vendor selection?
Yeah. Make them earn your trust, right? Before you give them access. That's exactly it. And then, what a vendor should do is come in and ask you what your goals are for your organization. And I don't mean security goals. I mean, we want to make our students happier. We want to make it easier to teach remote. We want to do these things. And then the vendor should help you take inventory of what you have and what's in your environment. And then they should work with you to come up with a plan. So I think that's the first step.
Great, thanks, Peter. So I see a question in Q&A, and it actually dovetails nicely with one of the questions I had too, which is that it actually seems like implementing zero trust is pretty daunting. There's this level of work involved in segmenting networks, in performing data classification and getting your data organized, creating a baseline of network activity and protocols. And that's particularly daunting for small businesses. What would you say about how to address that concern and try to manage the workload and the expense related to rolling out zero trust?
Yeah, and working for Cisco, I've always, we've always talked about enterprises, and oftentimes they are very large. And I always wondered, as I was talking about all these big enterprise solutions, what can my friend who has a small business do to protect himself? And so there are things that you can do for zero trust. The first thing I would do is I would, and most of them go right to the cloud. I would look for cloud applications that can help you. Most small businesses don't have a security person. Oftentimes the person doing IT has other responsibilities. So the more you can offload, the better. Getting your wireless as a service and your IT as a service. Cisco has our Meraki division that does that. So for a monthly charge, they will send you a wireless access point, and they have security devices and even security cameras that are all managed from the cloud. And you can monitor it, but like the security device takes all the best of Cisco and just does it for you. The other thing I recommend is that, at your home, for your kids and your family, and for your business, you really need to do multi-factor authentication. And that takes, if you think about it, multi-factor authentication follows zero trust principles. And it says, making sure that we know who the user is and putting those policies in, and then making sure that we're going to the applications that we're able to access. And so I would really recommend looking at multi-factor authentication.
Yeah, following up on that, would you say that Meraki has a pretty strong zero trust or fine-grained access control offering at this point?
Yes.
And how about
if you combine it with Duo, you've got you're not all the way to zero trust, but for a small business, it's probably enough.
Would you need to step up beyond, say, some of Cisco's entry-level small business products, like the old Linksys product line, or is that stuff getting wired into being able to perform like PEP-like functions if you're using that as a branch office?
A lot of that is being built into the Meraki product line right now. And if you get the Meraki SX, which is their security device, as part of what you get from Meraki, it takes all of Cisco's best security products, and a lot of the intelligence comes right to that SX device and does a lot of it for you.
I could imagine that would be very appealing to what I would expect would be a number of small organizations on the webinar today, like from small local governments, things like that. That'd make a lot of sense. Cisco is really best known for, at least in my opinion, for on-prem, networking, enterprise class technology. But my organization and many organizations are moving to the cloud, or either entirely or in a hybrid model with a distributed workforce. Can you talk a little bit more about how Cisco solutions enable hybrid cloud with CASB and SASE?
Yeah. Really, all of our security devices now we're making in multiple versions. So anything that you can get on-prem, you can get as a virtual machine or as cloud delivered. And so
I assume running on any of the major public clouds.
Yes, and we're applying all of our security there. But really, we see the way that the market is going is toward the cloud, and so most of our newest products will be cloud delivered. And I'm guessing 5-10 years from now, almost everything will be a cloud delivered product.
Great. I see a question in chat, and this caught my attention as well. I think you said SecureX was free, but if you free bundled along with the acquisition of other security solutions.
Yeah, so if you have one of our products like AMP or StealthWatch or our Firepower threat console, it's really just a matter of turning on SecureX and starting to use it. And most people can be productive within about 15 minutes.
Do you know if that also comes bundled with, say, ASA or even just some of your switches and routers?
Not switches and routers. ASA, we're moving most of the software to Firepower Threat Defense. And I don't know if it applies to just the old ASA software, which that needs to be upgraded anyway. But all of the the current stuff, it's just available for you to start using.
Great, thanks. So you mentioned we're almost out of time, so I think we maybe just a couple more questions. You mentioned and went into some detail about CMMC. That seems like it's had a bit of a bumpy start in the DoD in terms of rollout. Can you talk a little bit about what the current status of that is?
Yeah, so it's funny, this was started and really driven by a lady named Katie Arrington, in the Pentagon. And of course, when the administration changed, she left the organization. And people thought, oh, what's going to happen to it? Well, I was meeting with the CISO of the United States about a week ago, and he's at Office of Management and Budget, and he said, people think that because Katie's gone and it's new administration that we may not continue with this. He says, but we are looking at changes, but the need for this is so apparent, and the fact that it hasn't been done in the past and we're losing so much that it will not go away. It may change a little bit, but we're going to keep moving forward with this. And so my advice to people is, you're already, when you're applying for a contract or a grant, you're already saying that you meet privacy requirements, which are NIST 800-171. If you're not meeting those capabilities, and most people really are not, you really ought to get started on that, because you're already saying you are. you need to meet those requirements, and it's going to protect you for the future.
Great. One last question, looks like from Leo. You know, the simplistic view of zero trust seems to include more friction for end users. I mean, you can imagine if and I'm going to expand on this a little bit, for every app you log into, you have to go through MFA, for example. How does that square with the goal of making systems easier to use?
Okay, so, and I'm so glad you asked this, because zero trust done right should make it easier for everybody. You know, the ability to control access to applications and make sure they're secure, and to do it, you know, industry is driving all of these automated ways of doing it. That should make the defender's job a lot better, but it should also make the student's job a lot better. It should allow universities to offer new capabilities to students that they couldn't offer before. You know, this idea of a push multi-factor instead of having to type something in. And we're even going to passwordless. So, you know, if you have enough of the requirements met that you feel secure. So is the device an approved device? Are they logging in on a type of network that we think is acceptable? And have we checked their app, who they are based upon their device? Then you could make a risk-based decision saying, yeah, we can allow that person into most applications. And you can say for the very most secure, yeah, where they may still have to log in. But think about that, you know, for most applications, you don't have to type in the username and password anymore. That's making the experience better for our users and easier.
Yeah, I think we're out of time. I will just camp on there and saying I'm a Duo user right now. It is a lot easier than some of the old soft tokens and the SMS and the email one-time passwords. So it's definitely an improvement. Thanks for that. Yeah. So I think with that, we need to wrap it up. Thank you all for attending. I hope that was educational. Peter, I really enjoyed it. So hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
Hey, thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks, everybody.